Martin, they have me on instead of you. They have me
Well,
on.
why don't you introduce everybody?
Well, no, I mean, it's not.
Am I on now? No. Hello? Am I on? Yes. Let's see if I'm on without these two. Am I on? Do I have to stay here? Yes? Okay. So tonight is the start of my career as a moderator, interviewer. I've done too many panels, and I thought it would be much more interesting to interview other people and hear what they have to say about how to be good. I think being good is hard. Just ask Bill Gates how hard it is to be good. And it's an endeavor. It takes a lot of work. I think when people are trying to be good, many times they harm, and that's why even when you sign the Hippocratic Oath, you say that you're not going to harm, and obviously most doctors felt that they were going to do good. I think that doing good requires strategy, and we're going to hear about 3 strategies here that, in my opinion, work out to a good example of what it is to do good. And so our panelists here I will basically prefer that if they introduce themselves. So we're going to start with a brief introduction by each one. Let me just try to see if no? Okay. I'm going back. We're going to have each panelist introduce themselves. We're going to go from left to right here. So we're going to start with Steve. And I also understand that Steve has a short video to show. I hope that works. And so why don't you please introduce yourselves. Let's get started with Steve. And then we'll go into a Q&A that will first involve myself and then all of you. So please, Steve, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Yeah. Hello, can you hear me? Good. I'm so glad to be here today, and I wanted to tell you that for the last 26 years, I've been working on how to teach low-income children how to start small businesses. And today, I just wanted to show you real quick. It's about a 2-minute video, but it'll save me a lot of time if I can show that. So we'll go to the video.
This is CBS 2 News at 5.
14 years old and already a CEO. Some of the world's best and brightest young entrepreneurs celebrated their accomplishments in Times Square. CBS News Money Watch reporter Alexis Christophers has more.
We're just gonna log out and log
These New York teens took their passion for computers and turned it into a business.
We build and manufacture high-end gaming systems.
They launched Xenotech with the help of NIFTY, the National Foundation for Teaching Entrepreneurship, a program that teaches at-risk and low-income teens how to start and run their own business.
It's taught us a lot about, managing a business.
Here at the Marriott Marquis in Times Square, Xenotech, along with 24 other companies started by NIFTY students from around the world, were honored for their work. The kids, among 28,000 enrolled in NIFTY programs this year, got a chance to showcase their businesses.
I own Cherry Buns and Biscuits, and we sell dog treats.
And showcase what they learned.
At NIFTY, I learned about the 60-second pitch. Also learned how to build my business plan. They hooked me up with mentors who helped me develop my business.
Tomas Otero turned his love of wrestling into a business.
The NIFTY program taught me a new level of responsibility. She taught me how to take risks, how to be independent.
This 16-year-old's heart-healthy gift baskets were inspired by her grandfather, who has heart disease.
I'm not one of those kids that does well in a classroom, and the NIFTY program really gave me a chance to express myself with business, because that's what I love to do.
The students, once they start to get engaged, they can really start to see that school's a tool, that knowledge is power.
And that power will give them the confidence to succeed at whatever they do. NIFTY programs are offered in a variety of settings, including public schools, after-school programs at community-based organizations, and summer business camps. To find out more, just log on to our website at WCBSTV.com and click on links and numbers. Rosemary?
Alexis, thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. So I founded NIFTY in 1987, and it's become a big deal in America. And we've also replicated in 17 countries overseas. And the goal is over the next 30, 40 years that every low-income child in the world will learn how to start a small business. 3 quick points related to technology. One, the magic of technology is making it much easier for low-income people to start businesses. It's lowered barriers to entries and done a whole bunch of really positive things for small business. So I salute the technology pioneers. I think it's wonderful, and we try to teach as much technology as we possibly can. Second point is that, in my opinion, the ultimate technology is to teach people how to own and create assets. That technology should always be viewed as a tool and something that should be kept in perspective and that is used to help people particularly free up their time and energy to do whatever they want with their life. And the third point I want to make as an educator is that as wonderful as technology is and as incredible as it's going to be for our futures, I think someone who specializes in 14, 15, 16-year-old young people, particularly those at risk, you have to be very careful that they don't fall into the world where they're constantly online. And I've seen a lot of tragedies there, that it's got to be balanced, and that there are many, many other things in life that involve talking to people and actually communicating directly in experiences and exercise and sports. So I'm really happy to be here today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Before you go, you can sit down. I have a question. I understand that they'll make this work eventually. So if a kid is not old enough to get a driver's license, isn't it dangerous to have him run a business?
There are many. Can you all hear me when I respond? Yeah. Okay, good. We got that on. Actually, I think the younger you start a child in thinking about how to satisfy other people's needs in a market, and the younger they start selling a very simple product and keeping track of the records, and they know what their economics of one unit is, which I think is the most important thing to teach a child. I think the younger the better. All the businesses that we teach kids how to start, which are about 4,000, are all very simple businesses that there's limited liability, really none, and it's just great to get them started, I think. So,
thanks, Steve. Gabby, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us what you do at Hewlett-Packard.
Sure, I hope, I think it's working. So good afternoon. Is this too loud? No? Okay. I guess working for Hewlett-Packard, I'm representing the global companies in this panel. And a first observation here, if you look at the largest 100 economies in the world, 51 are multinationals and only 49 are nation states. So we do have a role to play. The question is, how do you go about it? And we found over the years that just writing out philanthropic checks is really not making the difference. You have to, first of all, have this aligned to your business. For 50 years, we've had global citizenship as part of our business objectives. So it's not something that's hip today and gone tomorrow. So it needs to be long-term. It also needs to be aligned to your basically your business per se. So we are the largest IT company in the world. We have 150,000 people, a lot of products, services, and software to bring to the plate. And that's really what we're bringing when we look at our global citizenship efforts. Most important, however, in all of this work is that whatever we do, we cannot do alone. We have to do it together with governments and NGOs. An example would be that one of the biggest issues that Eastern Europe, the Balkan states, or Africa have is that their best brains leave the country. So together with UNESCO, we're driving a program that says Stop the Brain Drain. And we let students and professors hook up to a computing grid whereby they can use this computing power to do their research and to create online communities. Or we work with the NEPAD on equipping 600,000 schools in Africa with ICT with a curriculum that goes with it. Or we're working with micro enterprises around the world to help them not only to learn how to run their businesses, but how to use IT to do that. So these are classroom settings where people can actually learn how to use IT to do a marketing plan or to do an accounting plan or to just do that in combination.
So here's a question I had for you. I was thinking about Hewlett-Packard with revenues of $91 billion a year, mostly out of computers and a lot of them out of laptops. And there's this gentleman on your left, Nicolas Negroponte, who's about to introduce himself, who has this amazing project, One Laptop Per Child, in which if he succeeds to giving a laptop per child for every child of the planet, would he leave you out of business or create a business for you?
No, I don't think that would get us out of business. I also think that what we're doing right now is not too different from what Nicholas is planning. As I said, we're working with a NAPOT on equipping 600,000 schools, but it's not just giving them a laptop, but it's really looking at what do they do with it. So you have to have a curriculum, a training, you got to localize, and you got to work with these local companies, NGOs, and governments in order to make sure that people know how to use technology. And we found that this is working very well for us.
So Nicholas, I think it's your turn now. Please introduce yourself to people who, of course, already probably know you. But let's get on to the One Laptop Per Child project also and talk about that.
Well, somebody introduced me recently as the good bin Laden. And this has indeed sort of seemed to be the case because some people look at the $100 laptop as a form of terrorism. And it has terrified the industry in many ways. I look at the problem in the following way. You're not going to have peace in the world as long as you have poverty. And the only way to eliminate poverty is education. And if you focus on education, particularly primary education, along the way you're going to have other second-order effects like the environment, like lowering the cost of health education, lots of things. So if you focus on education, you can do a great deal more than if you look other places to solve a particular problem. There are 1.2 billion children in the world. 50% of them don't have electricity. 50% of them live in the rural parts of the world. And the reason that's important is when you live in a rural part of a poor nation, even though that poverty is a much better form of poverty than urban poverty, which is the absolute worst, it's also so primitive that children will often have as a school a tree. Or some of the teachers won't show up, or the teachers may have, a sixth grade education at best. And so if you look at that and you say to yourself, how do I fix that? How do I deal with that? It is not by training teachers. It is not by building schools. In all due respect, it's not about curriculum or content. It's about leveraging the children themselves. And children are extraordinary. We don't give children enough credit for what they can do. I mean, we all know when your cell phone doesn't break, you give it to a 12-year-old. When you don't know how to use your laptop, you ask your kid. We all know that. And yet, we sort of think that they have to, after the age of 6, stop learning by doing and learn by being told. And in the best of situations, a child in the developing world is in a classroom 2.5 hours a day, 5 days a week, which averages a lot less than 2 hours a day over the week. So even if you make that experience better, you're only dealing with a small part of the problem. So what we did is we said to ourselves, well, how can we actually leverage the child for a lot bigger part of the day, and do something particularly for the poor children in remote parts of the developing world. And then we set out to do what we call the $100 laptop. And the reason we did that versus telecommunications is that telecommunications is in fact going in so many different ways, whether it's WiMAX, Wi-Fi, some of the new satellite concepts, using 3G, et cetera. There are many things happening. And I can maybe move some deck chairs around, I can sort of make a little effect here, but that's happening. The laptop wasn't happening. And one of the reasons the laptop wasn't happening is that there is a phenomenon which I highly respect, okay, and I understand where it comes from, and in full disclosure, please know that I'm a board member of Motorola. We do this at Motorola. And what is this? This is something HP does. The natural tendency of electronics, we all know, is to drop in price roughly, 100% every 18 months. In other words, this is really, it's natural tendencies to do this. So what do? You add features. You add features, and you hope that you add features fast enough so that at least you keep it stable, maybe even raise the price a little bit. I don't belittle that phenomenon. That's a very natural phenomenon. Then add to that phenomenon a second natural phenomenon, that is a computer programmer writes a piece of software. What do? They want to make it better. How do they make it better? They add features. And they do this, and invariably every new piece of software in my mind is distinctly worse than the predecessor. It's fatter, it's got this and that. So suddenly the fat lady can't sing. It's like a very fat person who's using most of their muscle to move their fat. And so if you look at these two situations, trying to get laptops connected to kids in rural places and trying to get the price down, you have to rethink the laptop completely. This isn't a matter of just looking at component costs. And there are two ways to make an inexpensive device. This applies to a laptop. You can take cheap labor, cheap design, cheap components, and make a cheap laptop. This is done all the time. If you travel in India and China, you'll see cheap machines that are cheap in the pejorative sense as well as the literal sense. There's a second way to do it. The second way is very rarely done. The second way is to take very large-scale integration, take really cool and interesting design, take a very advanced manufacturing process where you pour chemicals into one end of the factory and you spew out iPods at the other end, and then take very large numbers. The key is large numbers. And what you can then do is to make something that actually isn't a low-cost laptop only, it's actually a pretty advanced and interesting product. So that's what we set out to do as a non-profit. Very important. We are a non-profit organization, and Steve and I last night at dinner even argued about this, because I think being a non-profit is very important. I draw no salary. Okay. And somebody said to me when I started, you must be profit-making because you will be sustainable and get good people. Rubbish. My COO earns $200,000 a year, which is not very high, and I was looking for a CFO recently. How could I find a CFO that's really good for under $200,000 a year? So I put out a job description at zero salary, and the queue for the job was endless. People who had such extraordinary careers and wanted to be the CFO of one laptop per child. So in fact, it's very sustainable, at least to get it launched. So that's the quick story. It's launching in 8 countries. There are a couple of corporations that have been quite outspokenly against it. I think that's a little silly. It's a little bit like arguing against the Red Cross because you don't use Johnson & Johnson Band-Aids, but that's okay. By being a nonprofit, our moral purpose is clear, and I think that the heads of state around the world that are advocating this and are now part of it as a movement is really very, very important because it's different than going in. See, HP has shareholders. I have no shareholders. And I pick, and HP is a name, it could be IBM, anybody, they're shareholders. And they have to look at children as a market. I look at children as a mission. It's very, very different. And so maybe Steve and I will go back and forth on this, but I think that the one laptop per child, what I'd like to sort of leave with you as an impression, and such a big group, I actually have a working, assembled model with, not model, sorry, I have the habit of calling it a model. It's not a model, this is really one that came off the assembly line. It's actually machine number 5, and it really works. And some people have said it's a crippled small machine. Rubbish. This does 3 things your machine can't do. It's sunlight readable, it uses so little power we can hand crank it, and it's a mesh network. When you set it up, even when it's off, it's a little router, it's a little Cisco router type thing inside. And so a lot of the technology in here is really very, very sophisticated. And the people who worked on it, I'll leave it here for people to play with afterwards, people who worked on it really did, quite frankly, an extraordinarily good job. So I'll leave it there for people to play with afterwards. But
thank you.
That's the excuse me for being too long.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicholas. I wanted to ask a question that wasn't. I know you probably feel like giving your reply on here, but I just wanted to shift the debate to something different, which is, do you have to be American to be good, right? And I know it sounds silly and stupid, and everybody will say, no, you don't have to be. But wanting to be good seems to be an American vocation. I mean, here's an American corporation, and an American. Now, I'm not an American, and I just wonder, the other day I read an article called The Army of Altruists that actually described, I think I read it in Harper's, and it actually explained that there's no way to show that the Americans joined the military because of money. That you do the calculations, and there's just no way. It's not true that they don't have another choice, and in fact, that there seems to be an enormous altruism in joining the Army. And there seems to be a lot of altruism in doing things that, like I said, do good, and things that do harm, because it's unarguably a lot of harm has also come out of initiatives that try to do good. I wouldn't say that Bush intentionally wanted to harm Iraq when he called for the invasion, but the results are there. So it is dangerous to try to do good and then failing, right? Because you could. But the Americans, for example, I was reading about violent death. And I saw that Americans lead the industrialized countries in violent death, homicide. But if you consider suicide violent death, it turns out that this evens out because the Europeans are very likely to be violent against themselves, right, and kill themselves. So Americans seems to be want to take action. I know how to fix your life. I'll kill you. And Europeans say, I know how to fix my life, I'll kill myself, right? And when you take both the violent deaths, you find out that the actual rate of violent death is the same in Europe and in America. And so all this, in, of course, a humorous way, but I'm trying to say that none of these American initiatives, in my view, will succeed if there's no buy-in in the rest of the world, right? I mean, they need the rest of the world to buy into these initiatives. So maybe starting with you, Steve, you could tell us, what is it that we saw your New York accent commercial description very, very well, and it was really great. But, New York is doing pretty well. What about all the kids in Argentina, where I come from? And so tell us what you're doing outside of America. And also, of course, I know Nicola's project involves a lot of people, actually only from outside. So it's an American creation that is being deployed in the rest of the world. But I think, going to the point, if there's no buy-in, there's no development outside. So let's start with you. What's happening with NIFTY outside of America?
Well, first of all, I think one of the most important ways to do good, so to speak, is to create a business. And I think that teaching a child how to create wealth and how to build assets will eventually, over the next 100 years, really help to solve a lot of the world's problems. So we've tried to be global since NIFTY's very beginning. And I'm very proud to say that today we actually have offices in 17 countries around the world. And one of the top programs in the whole world in youth entrepreneurship for low-income children is right here in Germany. And our two leaders are here, or two of our three leaders. Ferdinand Snyder, I don't know where you are, but if you'd stand up, I'd love for you to wave to you. There you are. Hi, Ferdinand. And thank you. And Christiana Zumzam, who's a dear friend, and with Stephen Brennickmeyer, is actually on our board here, along with the head of Goldman Sachs of Germany. So we believe in globalization and getting kids all over the world to trade and to try to create businesses. We have a very large program in Israel, and we have a program in Hebron. We have programs in China and India and El Salvador and South Africa. We're the official youth entrepreneurship program in South Africa. It's going to be one of the top programs in the world. We're strong in Ireland and Great Britain and Netherlands and Belgium. And I really think that the number one way, I think, to prevent a disaster with weapons of mass destruction is to try to replicate amongst children of the world both democracy and the power of markets to solve problems. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
And I think American The altruism, basically, that you've described before, also is based on, if you look politically, how in Europe social welfare is a lot better than it ever was in the US. You see these things converging more and more, but I think it has a different history. But as I said earlier, one of the most important things that we believe is that you work locally with local people. They will tell you what they need. One time in South Africa, in Johannesburg, we came with this ICT center, and we thought with training and development, we're going to really be great and help out. And even the NGO was convinced that this was the right thing to do, to train certain people in Dikatole. But what it turned out to be was a step ahead, and we had to really take a look at, creating the school where we're going to teach, looking at some of the crime, looking at some other things. So we pulled in different people in order to even create a setting that made sense for ICT to come in. Another example was also in South Africa, where we created an iVillage, and that was in the province of Limpopo, 300,000 people. And we created access points there, like 23, where people could go and find out about what's most important to them, about health and government, and then they got trained, and then they also realized that this could benefit them much wider in their lives than just getting the basic information. And it grew, and it got bigger, and it got better, but it could only be done because there were people there that understood the needs of the community. So we are in 170-something countries, and we act only where we have employees, and where we then can engage locally, because it makes no sense to sit in Palo Alto and think, here's how we're going to save the world. You're not going to make a dent.
So is Nicholas, are you sitting in Boston and thinking on how to save the world?
First of all, I was in Boston 10 days last year. I carry an EU passport. I did half my education in Europe. My family is 100% European. And yes, I did study at MIT and stayed there a big piece of my life. But I don't think of myself as a citizen of any country at all. I have no nation. And I think nationalism is a disease, and it's a disease that has really hurt the world. I don't wake up in the morning and say, God, I'm doing good. I don't do it that way. But it is true that in the United States, for a variety of reasons, the concept of charity and being charitable is much more entrenched than it is in Europe. My mother, on her deathbed, I said to her, why don't you give away some of your money? Didn't have very much, but I said, why don't you give away half? Oh, absolutely not. It's for you. It's for the children. It's for the family. Well, you have a slightly different thing that happens in the United States, where some people made money very quickly, then they learn pretty quickly that giving your children money is really instant tragedy. I mean, that's one of the worst things you can do. And so they decide to give it to other causes, and that's pretty good. Europeans haven't generally learned that. They think that, the children have to work in the company, and they got to work in the family, and I'm going to project the family. My father, who was in the shipping business, kind of said, none of you go in the shipping business. We weren't the Kennedys, but my older brother committed his entire life to civil service. I went to a university. My younger brothers, we're 4 brothers, one's a painter, one's a filmmaker. Everybody did something different because the family said, do what you love. And most people don't get to do what they love. Okay, that's the big tragedy. And I think in the United States, you see more charity in general because people who have made money realize pretty quickly that that's what their children should do, and that's what they should maybe also do with their money. So there is a slight tendency to do that. Okay, well, maybe that's a message. I'll take that as fair. I was trying to look up this.
Let me ask you.
Okay.
Let me ask you. No, I know it's hard with the mics because
it really
we
is.
can't. We
be.
have to basically signal that we're speaking.
Yeah.
Now it's my turn. Okay. Now, I had a few questions for Nicolas. I'm a supporter of your project, and you know that in Argentina, through my foundation, we've been great supporters of your project. But when I blog about it or I write about it, I get a lot of questions, right? And the questions that you get asked in a country like Argentina, and I'll give you a few, and since we can't do this interactive thing, I'm going to finish my questions, and then I'll switch over to you, Nicholas. So these are my questions. The first thing people say is, they say, To really give one laptop per child, we need 1.5 billion. Yes, each one is very cheap, but we still have 10 million students, let's say, or something like that. And then they're probably going to be a little more than 100. So when we're done, where do we get this 1 billion from? And shouldn't we start with kids who are maybe 16-year-olds and then go to, shouldn't we start at one level and then if we give 5% to 5% or 10% of the kids every year, then eventually we'll get to the money because we just don't have it. The second thing is that people say, what about everything else we could be doing with that money? What about school lunches and so on? So where do we get the money? What else could we do with this money? And the third thing that people say is how important is this laptop versus, for example, investing a tremendous amount in providing books, improving libraries, reading, and what about the quality of reading that people get out of operating with laptops? So these are the three questions. I'd like to see if you can address them for the people here and really a lot of people around the world who love the project but are concerned about these issues.
I don't know, maybe, okay. The economics are really very simple. If you look at the $100, which in the beginning is going to be about $150 anyway, so you look at the $150, that's a big amount of money if you look at it as $150. If you amortize it over 5 years, which the World Bank and the development banks are willing to do, that's $30. $30 per year over 5 years. We know how to connect every child for $1 a month, unlimited 7x24 connection, so that's add in another $12, it's $42. That's the start price, it drops to $32 in about 24 months. You look at that $32, which is the end of 2008 price, and what you have to compare it is in your country, they spend $1,700 per year per child in primary education. If you're spending $1,700, my God, the 32 is meaningless. Meaningless. Argentina's the richest or second richest country we're dealing with. Now, in Rwanda, they spend $150 per child. And so suddenly the $32 is a big piece. But the $32 is going to leverage, in this case, the kids to do something that wasn't doable before. So even though the economics as a percentage of what people are spending on education is a bigger percentage, it may have a bigger effect. One common question I get is, why aren't we doing it in the United States? Well, we're not doing it in the United States because they average is $8,000 to $10,000 per year per child for primary school. When you're spending that kind of money, it really doesn't matter. Plus, you don't need the hand winding, you don't need a lot of the things. Do you start with older kids? No. You don't start with politicians always want to, because those are the kids who are going to be, first of all, in the job market, and second of all, perhaps voting for them in a pretty short period of time. To start with 6-year-olds is a very long-term investment. And it's not like building a tunnel or a highway, which may take 5 or 6 years, but you see a lot of construction going on. It kind of looks like you're doing something. Education doesn't have a payoff as quickly. So the reason you have to start with the very young children is if you screw up primary education, you spend all your time fixing it afterwards. And most kids don't get to secondary education anyway. I've built 5 schools in Cambodia, primary schools in the absolute remotest parts of that country. The town that I first did it in, which is where the first laptops went 5 years ago, and sort of very much an inspiration for the $100 laptop, the average income is $47 a year in that town. This year, I heard in September that twice as many students showed up for first grade. Now, that's what I call a success. Were they coming from other villages? No. What was happening? The 6-year-olds were telling the other 6-year-olds, school is pretty cool. You might want to come. The parents started going to the school, looking at it, what's happening, why is it? And suddenly, twice as many kids, instead of being in the fields, were in school. Okay. That sort of thing, to me, was so compelling when I see that happening, that I think that the economics is not the issue. a common, it's sort of the everything else part of your question. This happens a lot. Why would you give a kid a laptop when they're starving and they don't have primary medicine and their health problems and they don't have a roof, et cetera, et cetera? Look, when you're starving, all that counts is food. If you're unhealthy, all that counts is health. If somebody says, why give a child a laptop, I quickly say, substitute for the word laptop education, and you'll never say that sentence again. And it's true. You substitute the word. So the question is, do you believe that this can be part of and an important piece of education? If you don't, then don't do this. Okay, this isn't for you, it isn't for your country. If you believe it is, then it's not versus. I mean, nobody sits around and says, should we do education or worry about food? Not at all. They're always done in parallel. And then the books argument is that's the easiest, because Brazil, I know the number by heart, it's $19 per year per child in primary and secondary school. That's almost $20, which is $100 amortized over 5 years. The kid gets 2 books, maybe 3 books, maybe there's a library and so on. But you can just justify this on books, because only rich kids have the extra books like atlases and reference books, let alone all of the other pieces of literature that you'd want to have access to. If you're connected by Google or whatever to the internet, you've basically got all books, most books. And the amount of people the amount of goodwill, Paulo Coelho sent me a piece of email 2 days ago and said, I'm donating all my books. I thought, wow, well, we hadn't even thought about that. But if people want to donate their books and so on, we'll take their books. And so I think that we have a much better chance of providing the books and just the economics of books. And I call that the Trojan horse. We go, say, Mr. Head of State or Mrs. Head of State. Think of it just as a book. Just books, just textbooks. And most states, the United States is not one of them, most states control the textbooks, use the textbook channel. The federal channel in Brazil does the textbooks. So you may think of that as a liability, but we use it as a feature, distribute through that channel, and it's a Trojan horse approach. You say, okay, it appears gently as a textbook, and then at night, the kids come out and use it as a laptop. So that's the Trojan horse approach with sort of a book story in front of it. So books is an easy one. And the economics are not hard. These are not big numbers. They're big numbers if you take the population. Minister of Education in China has 220 million kids in primary and secondary schools. So you multiply 220 million times $100, that's a lot of money. But you look at what they're spending per child already, and take a small percentage. It's not a hard story.
No, not in China also, because they already started with the one child, so now they get the one laptop. And now, do we have any questions here? We have a little time left for questions. Yes, there, please. Just shout it. So it's about the content of the laptop. Does the laptop come with any content, Nicholas?
The laptop is, in ebook mode, a wiki. The machine has no DRM in it, okay? And this is very purposeful. It's a wiki medium, and if you want to put content on it, kiss your content goodbye, because this becomes public. And that's why it's open source. It's all very sort of, it's really geared on the Wikipedia model. That doesn't mean there isn't content. You'll see some announcements this week where big publishers are putting content out there, but it's their tiptoeing into open source and open content. So we turn out to be a venue for a publisher to experiment with truly open source and no DRM.
In Europe, we don't like DRM. Now, we only have like 50 seconds left, and I think we have to abide by the time. So I just wanted to thank everybody for doing good. I hope you keep doing that, and I hope everybody else here donates a little of